Hearing Donald Trump today say this is not a guns situation, his words, it's a mental health situation, to everyone in Britain, we're like, really? Not a gun situation? Someone just took a gun and killed 26 people. What would you call a gun situation? So perhaps you know Donald Trump well. Can you explain what he means?
Well, good morning, Piers, and it's a pleasure to be with you and Susanna. And unfortunately, we have to deal with this topic this morning. It is sickening to think of all places, a church, where people are going to give thanks and praise God, and to have something like that happen, regardless of the place, is sickening. But the idea that that's a place that you can't be safe is really tragic. But I agree with the president that this is not a guns issue. I mean, from what we learn, and it's still early in this investigation, this individual had some problems. And instead of addressing it in that way, I think that we can look and say, how many more laws would an individual have broken? Because that's the fact. When you look at a circumstance like this, there's countless laws that were broken on the way to this tragedy. But we could have stopped it with the appropriate mental health screening and care that could have been given to this individual.
Okay, well, President Trump repealed a regulation that prevented individuals with mental illness from buying firearms, and also unlicensed private sellers on the internet and at gun shows are not required to perform the same background checks as other sellers. So if it is not about guns and it is about mental health, President Trump already doesn't have a great record on that.
Well, again, I think what we need to look at, and first of all, again, we're very early in this tragedy to be talking about how it happened, but at least in several of the other incidents that have occurred, the other tragedies that have occurred in our country, I think when you look at it, there's very few laws that people can point to say, well, this law would have done anything to stop it. I think what we need to do is focus on those aspects in terms of care and intervention and screening that would stop it. And I do think that we need to look real hard at mental health, both in terms of screening and intervention, to make sure that people who shouldn't have guns don't have access to them, and more importantly, get the care that they get, so whether it's a gun or any other tool of mass casualty, that they don't have access to it, and that we make sure that we identify those individuals earlier in the process.
Right, but Sean, here's what I would say to you, is that in Britain we have mental health problems. We have big mental health problems. It's been a massive talking point for the last few years about the sheer volume of people in this country with mental health issues. But we don't have guns in civilian hands. So we have 30 we have 30 gun murders a year. You know, in America, you have 85 gun deaths a day.
I understand that. Right. And I would just argue that we have a different culture, and we understand we have a Second Amendment here, which gives people the right to bear arms. It was part of our Bill of Rights. And it's something that we're proud of as part of our entire Bill of Rights, the freedoms that we have from the government. And having the ability to bear arms is something that's tried and true in America. That being said, I think we do need to look at how we address making sure that these kind of incidents don't happen in the future. So I understand it. We're two different countries. We have two different sets of laws and rights that are given to our people. But the right to bear arms is something that has been part of our culture and our society since our early days.
I mean, on the question of what you could do, for example, after the New York terror attack last week, Donald Trump was very quick to say, we've got to close down the visa lottery program, which allowed that alleged killer to come into the country and bring a lot of relatives, right? He was saying that within hours. Today, he says it's too soon to talk about gun control. He said the same thing after Vegas. It's the NRA narrative. It's always too soon, even though there's always another massacre around the corner, but it's always too soon. So the debate gets stifled. In terms of what can be done, though, take Vegas. In Vegas, that shooter had 12 semi-automatic weapons, which are legal for purchase in the state of Nevada. But he bought bump fire stock, which is a separate device which you put on the semi-automatic, which turns them effectively into illegal machine guns. Now, that seems to me a very straightforward breach and circumnavigation of existing laws that could simply be tightened by saying we are going to outlaw and ban bump fire stock because it is purely used to convert legal weapons into illegal weapons. What is wrong with that?
I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at that. I think you've seen a lot of the leaders in both the gun community and in Congress talk about the need to do that. I think the key, Piers, is that There's a question of whether we rush to do something or we do it right. So you can pass a piece of legislation that says we're going to outlaw this, and as you've seen in so many other cases, all it takes is a bunch of individuals to figure out how to get around that particular loophole or that mechanism that is created to create it in the first place. So what we need to do is be smart about how we address these things. But at the end of the day, whether it was bump stocks or anything else, we've got to look at what's causing these people to do this. What are we doing to prevent this from the beginning? Because whether they can fire off 20 rounds or 30 rounds or 10 rounds, it's still an issue of mental health first and foremost. These are sick, deranged individuals committing these acts, and that's what we need to focus our time at.
Okay.
So it's not a question of whether we should do anything or nothing. It's a question of should we do something that prevents it from the beginning or not. And I think just passing feel-good legislation to make everybody feel better, but then it doesn't actually have an impact on the solution, is not. It'll make you feel better, but it won't save a life.
Well, in Britain and Australia, of course, both in the same year, in '96, we passed feel-good legislation outlawing guns from civilian hands, and guess what? There hasn't been a mass shooting in Britain or Australia since. So I would take issue with your premise there.